Hey guys, it's Mr. Wolfie, and I am actually driving back from one of my rotations, you know, like I've been doing for a while, months, and just thought I'd just kind of chat for a little while. I don't know if anybody's even paying attention. I don't know if you can hear me too good either. My phone's over there, and my throat's a little sore, so I'm not very loud. Anyway, so the other day, someone ran a truck into the Confederate statue at Ole Miss, which I thought was kind of interesting. I mean, there's all this talk about the statues, and then all of a sudden somebody runs right into a statue, claims that they're drunk and they didn't mean to, but, you know, everyone's like, oh, it was just an accident, he was drunk. But I actually think that they were drunk, but it wasn't an accident, because these things are not mutually exclusive. Like, I think somebody got drunk and thought it'd be a great idea to run right into that statue. For whatever reason, maybe they want it taken down. Maybe they just thought it'd be funny to do it. Maybe they were just trying to cause chaos. I don't know. These things can go all kinds of directions. Who knows? So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the statue issue and, you know, the flag, all that kind of stuff. There's all this stuff about the Confederate symbology and imagery in American society as though it were a systemic racism issue, as though the entire United States, because they have a few Confederate statues here and there, it proves that like the whole country's a white supremacist nation. And it's a tricky scenario. Okay, let me give some context. I have ancestors that I've tracked down that fought on both sides of the Civil War. Alternatively, and I'm going to get into this in another video, but I'm descended from the man that was the admiral of the fleet during the Norman Conquest. So like William the Conqueror, the first king of England, you know, the Norman invader that, you know, they went to the British Isles and took it over, pretty much kicked the Celts out and all that kind of stuff, in the Britons. And so I have kind of a long history of my people killing my people. so I have a unique outlook on a lot of things like this. I try not to attach too much moral equivalency to history, because when I do that, you see, when you make history about what's morally right and what's morally wrong, as opposed to what just happened, how it happened, and whether or not you want to do it again, then you miss out on the fact that if things hadn't happened the exact way they happened throughout history for the entirety, since well before human history, since, you know, reality began, then things wouldn't be the way they are exactly right now. So you can condemn actions of individuals that happened in the past, but it's tricky to try to either overwrite or ignore or just make too big a deal about how bad something was that happened, because if it hadn't happened, you wouldn't be here to talk about it, or something to that effect. Somebody wouldn't be here to talk about it, or somebody would. It would change everything. So you have to kind of, when you're talking about history, you have to be careful about not attaching your own personal morals to most things, because if you do that you can do that for everything in history. If you start doing it too much, then you start losing context and stop being able to understand the way things happen and the way things tend to happen. So, my hair is a freaking mess right now, by the way. It's hot outside today. So yeah. Alright, back to it. So the Confederate statues are tricky because the majority of them that I have seen personally, because I am in Mississippi, so there's several that are around, and I try to catalog them, I take pictures of them, and so that I know eventually they're going to be taken down, and I know the flag is eventually going to be taken down. The thing about the flag is I think there really needs to be an alternative that's a good alternative well before they decide to take it down, because they're just going to, you know, the fight's always about take it down, need you to take it down right now. But what happens when you take it down? You don't have a flag. We need a flag before we can replace the flag. You know what I'm saying? So I think there needs to be a discussion about what the replacement should be, and then people will be more accepting of actually removing it and replacing it. So about the Confederate imagery and the Confederate statues, so many of them just say things like, basically they're markers for the dead Confederate people, the dead soldiers that may not have a grave, because there's a lot of people that just died and they didn't have a chance to bury them properly, and people went missing. So there's a lot of people's family that didn't get buried properly and stuff like that. And a lot of places don't recognize Confederate graves as soldier graves and stuff like that. And so it's really just a marker that's kind of, this is for the people that fought in the war on this side, because no one else is going to acknowledge them. So this is acknowledging them. Now see, here's the problem with that. Actually, here's the problem people have with that. It's actually not a problem from my point of view, and I'll tell you why in a minute. People think that that's glorifying the Confederacy, when usually it's not. Circumstances look bad because those statues are usually erected around bad periods in time. If you look like the Jim Crow era and stuff, they put up a bunch of statues. But if you really look at what the statues say and what the statues are, like the people that they're made of, a lot of times it's not really, it's hard to actually classify that as glorifying the Confederacy itself, and more it's just trying to remember it. So, I mean, I see where the argument is, and I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for, the black people that hate it because, their family were subjugated due to the Confederate way of life, and, the southern states especially. So I understand their point of view, and I don't try to speak for them or try to pretend like they don't have an argument. That'd be crazy to do. But from my point of view, I look at it, and all I really see a lot of is people from up north coming down and saying, why do you have this? You lost the war. Just pretending that there isn't a north and south divide still is facetious. There is. People from the north don't generally like people from the south, and vice versa. At least from what I've seen. Like, people will come down and you can be friendly with them, but they've always got this like, do you really think you know what you're talking about to them? And I try to avoid doing that myself, but it's not really a rudeness. It's more like a, I don't know how to describe, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but there's an air about people where they see statues like that and they're like, huh, stupid Southerners, how dare they erect a statue to losers? You're like, well, it's, I can't help but get a little bit offended by that, or a little bit angry about it, rather. And I'm like, it's a statue to people that died fighting a war, and most of the people that died fighting the war were really just fighting to protect their homes and families. I mean, the vast majority were. There was, and the numbers are always skewed depending on who's telling the tale about the, who's trying to spread which propaganda from which side. But not a lot of the soldiers that fought in the Civil War were actually slave owners. It was mostly just Southerners that either took up arms to, because the slave owner people kind of encouraged them to, or it was Southerners that decided that they needed to protect their homes and families and defend what was essentially their new nation from an invasive force. Although the South did start the war, and the South did, was the aggressors for a lot of the war. But then when it became a defensive war, more and more Southern people jumped in. Because, I mean, once the Northern Army started marching down south, they were like massacring people, raping, pillaging, burning down villages, everything. It was extraordinarily violent, the Civil War was, and extraordinarily cruel what both sides did to each other. It's when you try to isolate history to one point, when you say the Civil War was only about slavery, it's not accurate. It removes so much of the actual history of what the Civil War was and what happened to everybody during that time period. Like, slavery was the cause of the secession. There's no question about that. The southern states didn't want to give up slaves for a variety of reasons. I'm sure none of them were really a good idea because slavery is stupid. But, so they wanted to make their own nation because they didn't like what the federal government was doing. So they did that, which is technically illegal and not completely recognized in legal status. So really, they never left the Union per se. They just said they did and tried to. Like, if they'd won the war, they would have left the Union. But they lost the war, so it was like everything that they did didn't count for anything. Which is really the main source of frustration between the two parties involved. So the secession was definitely about slavery. There's no question about that. The war itself was only a slight amount about the slavery aspect, because the North wasn't trying to fight the South to free the slaves. It wasn't like the U.S. government. We're talking about the U.S. government. The U.S. government wasn't fighting a war with half of its own country to free slaves. It was a financial related war. They were economically fighting. They were fighting to get the economics that the South represented back. So it was just a freaking mess, and people try to isolate it down to just the slavery aspect to kind of, really it's whitewashing, it's the same thing. It's trying to attach moral equivalency to the war, when really both sides were equally wrong in their own ways for various reasons. I mean, you could say that it goes back to World War II. You could say that the Axis was worse than the Allies when, the Allies, Russia did things to Germany and the rest of Europe that were appalling. And the things we did to the Japanese, and the things the Japanese did to the Chinese, and the things it's so hard, you guys. It's so hard to attach moral equivalency to history, because nobody's usually the good guys. Like I said, people try to isolate it down to the one aspect that you can kind of attach a right or wrongness to. In the case of the Civil War, slavery. In the case of World War II, the Holocaust. Everybody thinks, people that don't know a whole lot about history think the entire World War II was about the Holocaust and Japanese attack in Pearl Harbor. They think that's what World War II was about. But if you really analyze the entire history surrounding World War II, there's so much more going on there. So it just becomes this big cycle of people not getting the right information and people thinking they know everything about everything. And that's why we've gotten to the point where people think those statues just represent the glory of the South, when really it's, these people died and no one's going to acknowledge them if the statue isn't here. And I think the statues should go in graveyards and museums. I don't necessarily, especially if it should all be handled locally. I don't think the federal government should be involved at all. Not a lick. But if a city votes to move a statue or a flag or a symbol, and the vote goes in favor of moving it, it should be moved, and it should be done legally and through a good process. It shouldn't be a bunch of people ripping them down and causing a bunch of riots and stuff over it. That's insane, because those statues aren't hurting anybody, just sitting there and starting a riot over it, which is going to get people hurt and people arrested and people, in trouble and just cause hatred to flare up. That's a problem. All I'm really saying is don't make it worse when you're trying to make it better. Progress isn't necessarily a positive thing. Progress means forward motion. If you want progress to be a good thing, you've got to do things right, is all I'm saying. I'm all for moving stuff, and I'm all for changing the Mississippi flag if they come up with a good alternative first, because I just don't want I don't want this argument to be had for the next 5 years too. If they change the flag, I want it to be changed and stay changed. Like right now, they're talking about changing the Ole Miss mascot again, because the black bear was always a stupid mascot in my opinion. It should have been the land shark from the get-go, because I know the land shark is a strange idea for a mascot, granted, but but it's also kind of cool. No one's the Sharks. I don't know any other Sharks. And we have Sharks down at the Gulf, so I mean, it's not it's not a stupid idea. We have sharks in the Mississippi River. We have, the bull sharks get up there sometimes. So yeah, I guess that's all I really wanted to say about that. It's just people don't understand because the propaganda is more prevalent than the actual truth and information involved in a lot of subjects, and that's frustrating to me sometimes. Like, I just don't see things the same way a lot of people do, because I am concerned with my total family history, and I'm not exactly like ashamed of anything, because you wouldn't be who you are, where you are, if things hadn't happened the exact way they happened. So, living with regrets and living with feelings of shame about who you are and what you represent and who represents you. You only represent yourself unless you let other people represent you. If someone says, I speak for all these people, and they don't speak for you, come out and say it. Let people know. I speak for me, and I don't let any other people speak for me. Like this video, this is me speaking for myself. This is my point of view on all this stuff. So, I don't know. At this point, it's just become me on a soapbox ranting to the phone. So, I guess that's it, guys. Peace out. Love you guys. This has been Mr.